Welcome to SolarWinds MSP, SolarWinds EDR powered by SentinelOne, a live battle between EDR and ransomware. I'm your host. My name is Eric Anthony. I'm the Principal of Customer Experience here at SolarWinds MSP. About the only thing people care about, though, that I was a break fix and MSP owner for over 16 years. So I'm very familiar with what you guys deal with on a daily basis. I've now been here at LogicNow/SolarWinds MSP for a little over 5.5 years now. And basically my role here is to get you guys engaged, provide you with content, make sure that you guys are having the best experience possible with our products, with our company, and just make sure that everything's working as well as it can for your business. Now, a couple of general housekeeping things before we get started. All of the attendees are on mute, and that's not because we don't want to hear from you. That's simply because the audio works better that way. You can use the Q&A window to ask any questions that you might have. You can go ahead and ask those questions at any time. We may answer some while we're going through as time allows, or we will wait till the end during the Q&A section and get to them at that time. Let us know as soon as possible if you have any audio or video issues so that we can do what we can on the back end to make a great experience for you. And yes, this session is being recorded, and as soon as all of the elves in marketing get it all prettied up and edited, we will go ahead and send you a link to that. Our presenter today is Migo Kadem, and I will go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. Migo Kadem here from SentinelOne. Honored to be here. I'm the Senior Director for Product and Marketing with SentinelOne. I was building endpoint security product my entire career. Started with Checkpoint Endpoint Security, later with Palo Alto Networks, and currently with SentinelOne. Looking forward to show you guys today the power of the SolarWinds EDR powered by SentinelOne. We'll see a demo. We'll see several ransomware. Stay tuned.
All right, so we have a poll question to start out with, and this is just kind of get us level set and understand where our audience is coming from. So if you have had to help your customers deal with a ransomware attack in the past, go ahead and let us know by indicating yes or no, so we can kind of see where the audience is at here. And Migo, I kind of assume that we're going to see a relatively high percentage in the yes category.
Indeed, we're also going to present additional stats about that a bit later. My guess is that most of our attendees are experienced some ransomware during their career.
All right, so the results are a little bit different from our previous webinar session. The yes is a little bit lower at 82%, excuse me, and the no is a little bit higher at 18%. So interesting. All right, so just as an introduction as to why we implemented this and why we think EDR is important in the in the upcoming landscape. And that's because the world of cybersecurity has changed. The new threats that are out there are really designed to bypass traditional AV. Traditional malware and traditional AV have been out there, going head to head for a while. And so the new malware threats are really trying to make themselves hide from the traditional AV signatures, and the traditional AV just simply can't keep up. There's about 350,000 new malware samples a day, and that type of complexity just means that traditional AV can't keep up. The latest evolution of malware does everything it can to avoid being detected by those signatures, and so MSPs need to add additional tools to their arsenal to be able to protect against those broad range of threats. And if you look at that last statistic on the arrow chart there, in 2018, I think it was Cisco predicted that 1 in 4 desktops would somehow be infected by malware, ransomware, or some type of threat. Now, so why should we choose endpoint detection and response? Well, basically because it helps the MSPs prevent, detect, and most importantly, respond to these ever-changing threats. And the biggest part here is the response. One of the things that SolarWinds EDR does very, very well is it allows you to recover very quickly from a ransomware attack. You can roll back files that have been encrypted. It'll roll back settings in the registry, things that malware changed before it was actually detected as malicious. And this is something that traditional AV just can't do. And
Thank you,
with that,
Eric.
I'll let
Yes,
you go ahead and carry on.
sure. Thank you, Eric. So just covering the basic, just for um, we'll talk about ransomware. So ransomware is essentially a piece of malicious software, also known as malware. To some extent, a lot of malware looks very similar to ransomware by the ability to run and execute code on the infected devices. Ransomware is different because the payload it brings in usually will encrypt your files and will hold them for ransom. Most of the ransomware that we see out there is not a targeted attack, meaning they don't care who they infect, they just care to get money out of it. So they will try to spray as much as they can. So let's see a little bit of statistics about ransomware. All of the statistics that I'm going to speak about are from the SentinelOne Global Ransomware Report, beside the first one. The first one is what is the impact on the entire market. So it's $8 billion in 2018. This is the cost of this epidemic of ransomware to the market. Uh, we ask around 1,000 organizations and decision makers, and 56 of them did suffer in the last year a ransomware attack, and we're talking about organizations from all sizes. 57K US dollars. This is the average value that people were paying to ransomware in case they choose to pay the ransom, which is something, of course, we do not recommend you doing. The global number is a little bit lower than that. A few more interesting stats is that 53 of our responders were saying that the legacy AV was the one that failed to protect them. This is the common belief currently in the market. Also, 73% of the organization that did go and pay the ransom experience later another ransomware attack. So of course, again, I cannot stress that enough. We do not recommend you to go and pay, because once you pay, you also fuel this industry and makes them much more successful and much more powerful. We prefer you to install the right solution, and that solution can protect you. 44 hours, this is the average time that costs a single infection of a ransomware to the organization. Maybe some of you think it's like more than that, or maybe less than that. This is a pretty overwhelming number. Think about that you need to invest so much time in handling all the impact and all the side effect of a ransomware infection. Let's talk a little bit about the infection method, because the first one would be the phishing email, or the spear phishing. And the reason this is so popular and so successful is because it is working. Again, they do not care about to be more sophisticated, they just want to get a ransom. So today it's pretty easy to go and blast a lot of emails. People tend to believe what they see, at least the average people. This is the leading vector for ransomware infection. The second vector would be drive-by downloads. And by that, I mean like three main things. You go to a website, you think you go to the right URL, but the DNS is redirecting you to a different website. It may look the same, but it will serve you with a ransomware. We see a growing number of attacks utilizing DNS hijacking recently. Also, URL shortening is yet another method that is very easy. And again, ransomware authors are using that. You get a link, you don't really know what's behind the link. It's maybe very long, or a domain that you don't know, but you get a bit.ly or something that looks familiar, and then you can accidentally click that. The last thing is, of course, compromised website. This is about the drive-by download. Some website can be taken. For example, running WordPress is very common that people putting plugins on the website without knowing that they're actually serving these cyber criminals. The next infection method is exploitation. And by exploitation, I mean few things. The most common now is RDP and SMB protocols that there's a vulnerability in the protocol, so the cyber criminals can utilize this vulnerability to get more people infected, more devices infected with ransomware, laterally move within networks and inject and getting more and more infection, getting more and more ransom out of it. And the last one I want to mention is USB and removable media. Like if you ask somebody like 5 years ago about USB, they will probably tell you that it's going to die, it's going to subside. People are now using Bluetooth and other methods. But the reality is that people are still using USBs, and every now and then you see an article talking about how easy it is to get users to put USBs into their devices. One example is like if you go and throw on the parking lot 100 USBs, around half of them would be inserted to corporate and to the business, just in order to see who lost that, who this belonged to. And then, of course, once they put it inside, then the infection, it's pretty easy from that point. Over my last few slides, I showed you few splash screens, and this is also something very interesting about ransomware, because the splash screen is trying to do two things that are kind of contradicting. From one hand, it's trying to intimidate the user, causing him to fear. This is why you will see like a countdown usually. So it gives you kind of a sense of urgency. From another perspective, they also try to look credible. So you will believe that once you pay them, you will get your files back. And this one is, of course, the most famous out of all. This is what is called WannaCry. So WannaCry, it's a very interesting story. It is believed that it uh, impacted 1.3 billion devices across the globe, uh, most of them in the first 24 hours. So this was utilizing a vulnerability that was already patched by Microsoft 91 days before. Again, 91 days, all the businesses had a chance to just install a Windows update and be protected from WannaCry. And the reality was that 3 months later, utilizing a tool that was kind of stolen from the NSA by the shadow brokers, they released that publicly, and then malware authors and cybercrime also utilized that in order to compromise devices. It is still not clear completely who is behind that, but the most effect was on the NSH, the healthcare system in the UK, which really suffered a lot from that. I think around 2 weeks they were off. Nobody know if any lives were kind of affected by that, but there was a lot of impact associated with that. With that said, let's jump to the demo. A few words about the demo before I'm starting. I'm going to show you 3 different ransomware. The first one is a spear phishing attempt, meaning I'm going to open Outlook. I'm going to show you how legit is the email looks like. Then somebody just open that particular attachment and immediately get encrypted. We will then roll it back. Then we're going to see another ransomware that this time is something that is trying to look like a legit Chrome update. Somebody gets that, you see the icon of Chrome, it looks pretty legit, double click, again a ransomware. The third ransomware I'm going to show you is called Robinhood, and this is the ransomware that is responsible for the Baltimore City Hall attack that is still ongoing. I think I saw like 2 days ago, like 65% of their operation is now back, but still the city hall is kind of crippled. People cannot pay the bills. Some infrastructure are still down. With that said, allow me to move to the demo. So this is a device installed with SolarWinds EDR powered by SentinelOne. You can see currently there are no threat detected. Let's go to the console. This device is a Windows 10 running with all the latest updates. As you can see, it is updated, 64 bits in this case. There's no threats on it. Let's go to the policy for a second, because I'm going to run this demo on a detect mode, which really does not represent reality. In reality, the SolarWinds EDR will prevent such attacks, but for now, we do want to allow it to see how the rollback functionality is working. So we're running currently on detect mode, as you can see. My third demo will be on protect, so you can see how reality will look like. So now we are ready. Let's move back to the agent side. Let's open Outlook and see the email that we got. Mozilla security patch look pretty legit. Dear user, we've discovered a new high-risk vulnerability for Mozilla Thunderbird. Please read the attachment. And again, don't worry, it is safe. So we're going to open that and not save that to the disk because we want to be careful, right? Once we open the document, just take a second. Looks pretty legit. Again, US CERT, Homeland Security. And again, you can see here immediately the SentinelOne SolarWinds EDR is detecting. In a real life scenario, this is where this document is now being quarantined and removed. But again, for the demo, we're going to allow it to run because we want to see all the way till the rollback. Let's go to the console side. Let's close this window and go to the console side. Of course, the device is a little bit slow because the encryption is starting at this point. Here we have our detection already. Let's open that. Let's see a little bit about the information we already know about it. So no action was taken. As you can see, it was not killed, it was not quarantined, no remediation yet, and no rollback. The indicators is very interesting. This is the reason we've detected that, because it's a PowerShell post exploitation script, and we are mapping all this to the MITRE attack metrics, so you can know more about the reason why it was detected. This is the path of the file. You can see more information. It is not signed in this case. This is not a signed document. Mostly PEs or executables are signed. Attack overview. One interesting thing you can see here, already 207 file operation, which is kind of already suspicious. Here, the communication that it was generated, and let's look on the storyline. So you can see the Windows open a PowerShell and started to spawn processes, and the most interesting one is, look, is trying to delete VSS shadow copies. When you have SolarWinds EDR installed, if something is trying to delete shadow copies on your Windows devices, they cannot do that. The VSS shadow copy, which is the local backup, are protected, meaning that they will not be successfully deleting those. So we can see also a GPO update file created, and again, this is the files suddenly pop up in our case. We didn't see at the splash screen because they want to encrypt before they put the splash screen. And here you go. We have the Makta blocker. We have 12 hours to pay the ransom. This is all the details here, as you can see it. Let's check the actual files to see if it was successfully encrypting. And here you can see my sample pictures all encrypted. Let me just arrange that so you can see that. Just give me a second here. Yes, so you can see the extension was changed, but also the file was encrypted. So if I want now to access my documents and files, I cannot do that. The ransomware splash screen, again, trying to intimidate you, but also to give you a sense of urgency. It's very common that they also put that on a HTML file to ensure that you can see the ransom note. Oh, this is the Internet Explorer. Sorry. So you see, this is the same splash screen is available as HTML, just to ensure that the users see that. Okay, our magic moment is now. Let's do the rollback. And here you go, we have our files back. So although they were encrypted, we were able to stop that. I just resolved the threat. So currently I'm back to normal. Here's my files. And I'm immediately moving on to our next ransomware. This time I'm just going to copy that to the disk. Again, it looks like a legit Chrome extension, Chrome update. When I double click it, then the magic starts. I'm getting another splash screen. Immediately detected, and just to remind you, we are still on detect mode, so we allow it to run. This time, let's just roll it back immediately without encrypting the files. Just going here, doing the rollback. Immediately, you should see the file being cleaned. Exactly. So the file is being cleaned. I'm going to resolve the threat for us to continue to our third ransomware. And this time, I'm going to change the policy. So So I'm going to the policy, which was currently on detect only, and moving that to protect, which really represent reality. And commonly, this is what you get when you install SolarWinds EDR. Now I'm going to drop on the same device the Robinhood ransomware, again, the one that was very famous because of the Baltimore attack. Let me just take that. Immediately detected, immediately clean. So this one did not have any chance to infect the device because, again, we were running on protect mode. So just to recap the demo part, we saw 3 ransomwares running. The first one was coming through Outlook and capable of encrypting all my files. Then we did a rollback. The second one was pretending to be a Chrome update, which is very common for people to click on, and we roll it back also. And the third one, we just did, the protect mode, which is what you should run on your environment. Immediately when the ransomware hit the disk, it was immediately being cleaned before it had any chance to do anything. Let's talk a little bit about some best practices beyond installing, of course, SolarWinds EDR. First is keep it clean. When I say keep it clean, I mean first go and patch your OS whenever possible. There's always something coming. Also, the software itself, if there's a software that is outdated, of course, it is recommended to install the latest and to update it. Educate. So many, I mean, the human factor is the main driver for this industry, right? If we teach people how to identify phishing emails, how to understand the risk of downloading stuff from the internet, and of course, socially aware. This is a growing factor that not many people are kind of thinking about this. But whenever somebody wants to attack your organization, your business, you can just go to Twitter, to Facebook, and all the social networks and collect information about your environment, what you're running, what the name of your pet, maybe it's your password. Some people reuse password across services. So we need to really to be careful about what we put out there. It's publicly available, and sometimes it can also cause harm. And I cannot stress that enough. Backup, backup, and backup. Although you have SolarWinds EDR by SentinelOne, you should always keep your important stuff backed up with the solution from SolarWinds.
All right, thank you, Migo. And so if you guys are interested in, getting more information, you can sign up for a live demo, and that link is put in the chat window. So you can go ahead and grab that there. And those are available at a variety of times that suits your schedule. And if you're ready to go ahead and try SolarWinds EDR powered by SentinelOne, just go ahead and type trial in the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure that someone gets in contact with you shortly after the webinar. Now, we do have quite a few questions, Migo, so I'm going to go ahead and get up here to the top and see what I can find. Okay, so the first question I have is, and this is an interesting one, how much faith do we put into new AI technology over the existing signature-based technology for malware detection purposes?
Interesting question. So first, the technology is fundamentally different, meaning that when you use AI, you just go and train on a large set of information, and then you don't need to update that constantly. Unlike that, when you use signature, every time there's a new stream of malware, there's a new family, there's a new technique that is being introduced out there, the legacy AV vendors need to create a signature for it, test it, see that it's actually stop and detect this, and then push it to the entire fleet of agents of endpoint. This is, of course, you're all familiar with that. It costs a lot of trouble. You always need to update the latest definition. It also constantly scanning your endpoint, and this is not like SentinelOne technology is different. I mean, we do not scan at all. I mean, if you want to go and scan, we allow you to do that, but the product does not scan by itself. There's no scheduled scan. There's no need to do that by all means. So the way it is working is that it applies multiple layers of AI on the device itself. And the reason we do that on the device is to eliminate any option that malware authors are using, which is uh, disable connectivity and then start doing the malicious activity. We do want to have all the logic on the agent. So we have multiple layers, static AI, behavioral AI, and so on. I can speak probably like 2 hours just on that. So just mentioning a little bit. So we do not require updates, meaning that you can run maybe quarterly releases, like because we introduce more feature, we do recommend you to update every now and then, but it is not like a signature update. I mean, your detection is not dependent on this update. It's more like functionality updates. I hope I answered the question.
I think so. The next question is probably one of our most popular from this morning, was how does this deal with network shares, or should the agent be installed on servers as well?
So, so the answer is yes, the agent need to be installed on server also. The way SentinelOne technology is working is that it protects the device it is installed on. So if you have a network share that you want to protect, put SentinelOne on it. We support Mac, we support Linux, we support all kind of Windows OSs. So you should be covered by that.
Okay, and the next question is, does SolarWinds EDR interfere with the SolarWinds backup product in any way?
Sorry with my mute. No, of course we can run in parallel, and I actually recommend you to use the backup from SolarWinds. I do not recommend just relying on the ability to roll back, because this is very much tailored to ransomware infection, and it's not about taking a lot of your information and put that on a remote location, which I recommend as a best practice by all means.
Okay, and then the next question is a multi-parter, so I'll give it to you a piece at a time. Does the rollback functionality in SolarWinds EDR rely solely on Shadow Protect?
Yes, the rollback functionality relies on shadow copy and shadow protect. The reason we do that is because it's already available in the Windows OS, and the way we handle that is that we protect those shadow copies. So if a ransomware or any other malware is trying to manipulate or maybe delete, like you saw on my example, they will not be able to do so, meaning that we are protecting those. So we protect it, and then we can utilize this for the rollback. Just to mention, on a real life scenario, you're going to experience a detection and a prevention much earlier in time. And in a real life scenario, you will not need too much to use the rollback functionality, because we will prevent it before. This is yet another layer of protection. If something can start encrypting maybe few of your files, you can just hit the rollback button as you just saw a few minutes ago, and then you're back to normal. Your user can continue working, no impact, no need to reimage the device, no reason to waste time and to work further on that.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify because I didn't realize it when I was reading it, but Shadow Protect is actually a product from another company for backup. This relies solely on the Windows Shadow Copy service and the VSS writer that's built into Windows.
Yes, correct. I thought by Shadow Protect you meant Shadow Copy. Yes,
So
we
did I,
rely
but then
on
I
the
realized.
Microsoft. Yeah.
Okay, so along those same lines, does it roll back to the most recent good file or document, or the first good file document it can find in the history, which could be, several days old?
So the way VSS is working is that it's constantly take journals of the files that are being available on the disk. So the way the SentinelOne technology works is that we're constantly drawing stories. Like we know exactly, let's say somebody started from a Chrome, I'm sorry, Chrome tab, then download a file, then double click the file, then maybe open a PowerShell, and then start encrypting. We know this entire chain whenever we detect, and this is why we can roll back. So the rollback does not touch any file that was not affected by that particular malicious activity. If you have another file open, or you're currently maybe writing a Word document that was not affected, it will not be touched by the backup. So it's not a device backup and restore, it is only the malicious activity. Uh, and what happened in reality is because VSS is taking journals all the time, what you're getting is to the copy that was available just before the infection. This is what happens.
Okay, great. And then we have a question that I'm going to try and translate a little bit here. I think it pertains, specifically to the demo. They saw the rollback feature where it, decrypted the files and, or not really decrypted them, but restored them back to the previous known good copies. But how did that actually remove the original ransomware?
So as you saw before on the dashboard, there are several steps before the rollback. It starts with killing the malicious processes, and this is very similar to what Legacy is doing. They usually go kill and then quarantine, but they're only touching the exactly the malicious file. What we do after we kill a ransomware, we quarantine the malicious files. Then we do another step we call remediate. Remediate is all about cleaning everything that this malicious activity was doing. Just to give you a few examples, registry keys, startups. I mean, a lot of ransomware is trying to be persistent, meaning that after you reboot the device, they want to start again, right? All those things are belong to what we call remediate. And when you remediate, you get everything being cleaned. The rollback itself is just restoring every file that was affected by a ransomware attack back to its last uh, before the infection state, back to its normal state. So from a user perspective, it's really nice because the user can work, then the rollback is happening, it can continue work. There's no additional removal, no decryptors, no additional activity you need to take. You are being covered. And of course, you get this feedback from the console. So if there's any issue with the restore, you get that, you know about that. You will get like the status of that.
Yep. Okay, awesome. So the next question is with a with the Word document that you showed in the first example, if protected mode had been turned on rather than detect mode, how would that Word document have been handled um, before it started encrypting files?
So as you notice, I opened that and then like maybe a few milliseconds after there was a pop-up of detection. In that particular point in time, the Word document would have been quarantined and not be accessible anymore to the end user. Of course, you as the administrator, you can upload this, retrieve that, and get the file and check it later if you want. But from a user perspective, the file is quarantined, is removed. Because it came from Outlook, we will not quarantine Outlook, of course. We will not quarantine Microsoft Word because they are not to blame. They are just the application that were running this. But the malicious activity starts actually with the malicious document. So he's the one that's going to be quarantined. And everything happened after it. As you saw, there was a PowerShell activity. There was a VSS attempt to delete shadow copies. All those activities are being remediated and restored if needed, right?
Okay, and that leads me into another question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but because we didn't actually download that file from Outlook first, that would be considered a fileless type of infection?
It's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of opinions about what is fileless. I usually treat fileless as anything that is not a PE, meaning not executable or not a program, because files are not allowed, documents are not allowed to execute code on the OS. So to some extent, they need to use other things. In this case, for example, you saw that the Word document actually spawned a PowerShell, which is a part of the system. The PowerShell exists on every Windows device, and it just, like a command line prompt that you can run things. In this case, it was used in a malicious way. So document files like PowerShell, which is a part of the system, to me, are considered not a file-based malware in this case. So I would say this is a fileless attack. Others will claim differently, but it's also fine. I mean, there are different definitions. This is the way we treat that, because a file-based malware, which was 100% of the files, like maybe 5 years ago, used to be like that. It's really executable that you need to double-click in order for it to run. Sometimes it gives you a prompt of, do you want to run it? Is it signed? And all kind of other protection it has. But again, from a document perspective, to me, document would be considered fileless because it doesn't have permissions to execute code.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder to everybody who is asking this question, yes, it's being recorded. And as soon as the marketing department works its magic on it, we will go ahead and send that link out to everyone who is registered for this webinar. So because we're getting a lot of questions on that, I wanted to go ahead and remind everybody of that. The next question is probably our other most popular question, and I can't believe it's actually taken us this long to get to it, is would you use SolarWinds EDR in conjunction with or alongside of a traditional AV product?
So from a technology perspective, my recommendation would be just to rip and replace, meaning that once you have SolarWinds EDR, you don't need additional security software on your end devices. The reality is that sometimes, people are running things in parallel, and we support that. I mean, from a technology perspective, you can run SolarWinds EDR in parallel to legacy AV or to other solution. From a performance perspective, it might give you some issues, but again, this is the reality for anyone that runs legacy AV because of the scanning, because of the updates and all this. With SolarWinds EDR, you don't get any of this performance impact. So you can run it also covers you from both kind of markets. I mean, Gartner is segmenting the market to EPP and EDR, and we are covering both in our single agent. So yes, most of our customers are replacing the legacy AV with the SolarWinds EDR. If you still want to run in parallel, this is also supported.
Okay. The next question is, what happens or how do I allow for a false positive? So say I have a piece of software that EDR declares or detects as suspicious. How do I, whitelist that?
Sure. So we have like 6 or 7 layers of exclusion that one can do from the console. And what drove us when we designed that is that if you face something like that, you should be able to handle that immediately from the console. You should not need to go to support or having like long cycles, because we know it is painful. Just to give you one example, if you have a software that is signed, you can define if a software is signed by this and that uh, um, um, authority, then allow it to run and don't detect that. Our engines are going to continue working and continue identifying. And if they, after they detect and they see, okay, there is exclusion, they just skip the mitigation part of it. So this is the way it works. So you can go either by whitelisting, you can go by path, you can go by signature, you can go by a browser is yet another option. We allow a lot of options in order, again, to just make it easy for the users in case they face something like that, so they can really kind of immediately respond to that with no impact on end users.
Okay, and speaking of impact, and I know this was a popular question this morning as well, what is the performance overhead on an endpoint running SolarWinds EDR versus maybe traditional AV?
Sure. So it's really day and night in this case, because again, like we're not scanning, we're not doing all this. Usually we're running, just taking a little bit of memory. Uh, of course, if you copy a large chunk of files, you might see a spike on the CPU. It will not be more than 2% the maximum case would be like 2%. And it's really light on the agent. But again, I do recommend, we do have a report coming from Passmark, which is a well-established a vendor that actually review and check performance of solutions. And of course, we gave them our solution and said, okay, test that. They tested us against others. And you can see over there the impact. The impact is minimal. You should not expect anything like, from a legacy AV solutions, just because the technology works differently.
Okay, great. And then we have a couple of questions that I think are kind of similar, um, in that how does SolarWinds EDR perform against screen locking ransomware? And then this kind of applies the same way. If the ransomware goes undetected, um, what um, how do you roll back from that?
So this is kind of an imaginary. We didn't see cases like that, but even if something is not detected and it's already being, if you remember before, I explained that we're constantly making stories on the agent, understanding the deep relationship, the context between the activities. Even if there's something that is benign that you want to roll it back, you can use an API call to roll it back. This is something we can also do.
Okay,
So
yes.
even if something was, let's say, undetected and you want to roll it back, using the API command, you can say, this story I want to roll it back, and of course the agent will respond to that and will roll it back.
Yeah, and I would think that there's probably very few situations where it's actually completely undetected, because every piece of ransomware that I've ever seen is going to make that call to the VSS writer to try and eliminate all of the shadow copies. It's going to start encrypting files, and all of that is going to look like suspicious behavior to SolarWinds EDR, and that's when SolarWinds EDR is going to kick in and say, "Hey, this is bad. You know, you might want to roll all this back."
Yeah, definitely. And of course, most ransomware, part of it is doing a nice splash screen to the user. So they're pretty easy to detect after the effect. And of course, you can, after the effect, even a week or 2 weeks after, you can roll it back. That's also something I've seen that is working in the wild. That even if the device is not attained by any person, it had a ransomware, maybe some time passed, yes, you can roll it back even later in time.
Yep. Now, like we talked about this morning, though, that's only if SolarWinds EDR is on the device before it gets infected.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, some people were asking before in the session we had, can they install SolarWinds EDR on already infected devices? My recommendation would be no, don't do that. I mean, this product was not designed to kind of understand things that happened before it came. So like it might be successful in some cases. I also seen that, but it is definitely not best practices or approach you should take. The magic of SentinelOne is that we see everything, and when we don't see the beginning, it's really hard to understand where it come from. And this is really what you want to know. Where did this ransomware come from? Because maybe tomorrow you will have another one coming from the same open door.
Yep. Okay, so the next question is, can we select a different rollback date, time slash, version of the files, or is it just the most recent one?
It's the most recent one. Again, like if you're looking for a more granular backup functionality, I do suggest going with the other SolarWinds solutions that can provide you that. The way you need to consider the rollback capability is very, very specific to malicious activity, very specific also in some cases to ransomware, in most cases, also to some other form of malware, but it is not replacing a full backup solution that you can manage and you can do other stuff with.
Okay, and then this is actually a question that I can answer. How is EDR installed or rolled out? So that's pretty easy. You can download the agent from the SolarWinds EDR dashboard and install it a device at a time. Or we've actually created some automation manager policies that you can use both in N-central and RMM to mass deploy the SolarWinds EDR agent out to the devices that you have currently in your RMM or N-central dashboard.
Sure. And just to add to that, we use token, meaning that you want to add the token so it will go to your console. So the deployment will have the token and immediately be reporting to the right console, that your console.
And then this is probably a big open-ended question. So if you could probably just hit the highlights of it. But what kinds of things are monitored by EDR?
Well, the easy answer would be everything. It can be key logging, it can be API calls, it can be registry changes, it can be file activities, meaning writing a file, injection to another file. It is a very long list of activities that we watch them all. Also traffic, also domains, also URLs, and all these are part of the calculation that the AI component on the agents is taking into consideration. Overall, bringing you like a black box that you put a ransomware, you put other malware, it can kind of understand what it is and then prevent that and of course roll it back. So we are looking on everything you have in mind and probably a few more things.
Okay, and then we have a couple of people asking about N-Central and RMM integration. So that is planned, but I don't have roadmap dates for that. So I don't know exactly when it's going to occur, but it is in the planning right now. For right now, like I talked about in the deployment, we do have those scripts that are available to you. So you can get those from your sales engineer and they will be able to get you those scripts to be able to do mass deployment. Okay, let's see. A couple of these are repeats now that we've already answered. So this one, will it work on servers? And I know that we had a couple of questions before, especially around remote desktop servers. So Migo, if you could talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so my recommendation would be to every device you want to protect, you should have a SolarWinds EDR on it. Meaning that if you have a server that, for example, a file share, is it running Windows, then put the Windows version. Is running Linux, put the Linux version in order it to be protected. We do not protect devices that are not being installed with the SolarWinds EDR. With that said, there's another thing that is very interesting. If something coming into a device that is, of course, protected from a lateral movement, it will, of course, be protected completely. We cannot protect, again, devices that are not installed, but the devices that are installed are covered.
Right, and maybe to make this a little bit clearer, because we talked about it in the earlier session, uh, we talked about lateral movement between devices, and let me just make sure I get this right. If I have EDR on the server and on the endpoint, but for some reason the endpoint gets infected and starts encrypting files on the server share, the server EDR is going to detect those files being encrypted, and therefore those will be able to be rolled back. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. So one agent installed on one device cannot roll back something that happened not on his disk, on someone else's disk, right?
Right.
So it's really to put that across the board and to have all the devices protected.
Okay, and then obviously a lot of people are interested in pricing. We don't talk about pricing in webinars just because there's so many different currencies and everything, because it's all global. If you will go ahead and type trial into the Q&A window, we'll go ahead and get your account manager in touch with you so they can discuss pricing with you. And then, okay, the next one, let's see. Does SolarWinds EDR protect against auto-run USB devices?
Of course. Beside the fact we have integrated what we call a device control policy, which means that you can decide what can be connected to your devices and what cannot be connected. So it can be prevented to begin with. If something is running from a USB, from the agent perspective, it's the same, meaning that it's yet another process running on the system. So if it's something that would do a malicious activity, it will be prevented. And of course, would be, of course, if there's access, it can also be quarantined and so on.
Okay. And then the next thing is, does SolarWinds EDR stop users from accessing malicious websites like a content filter?
So the answer is no. SolarWinds EDR does not have a web filtering functionality. Uh, One of the reasons is that this is not very deterministic. One day there's one URL that is malicious, another day there's another one. Maybe they change. Sometimes again, like WordPress sites, sometimes they host malicious activities without knowing that. So it is not a very effective way to really mitigate risk from this perspective. With that said, anything that will happen to the device, meaning that if you go to one of these URLs, which is malicious, and it goes back to your device and start to do stuff, this is where we're going to detect that, prevent that, and if needed, to roll it back. Another thing that, without kind of confusing anyone, we do have firewall control as part of the functionality that we provide, that if you know about a particular URL that you want to block, you can do that, but I wouldn't say it is a full-blown web filtering functionality. It's more aimed particularly at malware.
All right. So getting a couple of questions here around SentinelOne and scanning. Um, the first one is, how often does SentinelOne run a scan on a device? And should we run a scan when we first install SolarWinds EDR?
Good question. So the answer for the first question, when we are running a scan, the answer is never. We never scan the entire device unless you select to do so. Uh, the reason we implemented these features that some customer wanted, like to install and to make sure there's nothing, kind of a dormant malware already waiting on one of the folders. So you can go to the console and trigger a scan. This would be a one-time scan. And starting this point, the way we work, every new file we see, we immediately evaluate this against our AI components. So there's no scanning or like you don't need to schedule a scan or anything like that. You can either decide in day one to scan the device if you want. It's not a must, because even if the dormant malware will run, then we'll pick it up. So it kind of doesn't really cover, it's not really necessary. But again, you can do that. One of the reasons we did it is because of compliance. Still some compliance faculties are, they're not updated with the latest technology, and still part of what they demand is the ability to scan. So we have this ability, but I would not necessarily recommend using that because it's kind of redundant from that perspective. SentinelOne, once you install it, everything that happens on the device is protected. So no scan is needed, no scheduled scan need to be configured or anything like that.
Okay, and the next question is, does running EDR on a SQL or Exchange server have any issues?
We have many customers that are running so. So of course, this is a more sensitive device, not like a user. I would monitor that for a bit, maybe put on detect mode for a day or two to see if everything is running smoothly, and then move into protect mode. But we have many customers running on Exchange. Also, if there's anything you want to exclude, as I mentioned before, if you have any kind of particular application that is running all the time and you just want to skip looking on it and you trust it, then it's pretty easy to go to the console and to add that as an exclusion.
Okay. And kind of to the point of those scans earlier, does EDR use any signature checking? How did it detect the ransomware before the file was actually run?
So once the file is being copied to the disk, this is where our AI component are starting to run. Again, we have several layers. The first layer we call it a static AI layer, which is essentially built to before execution. So whenever a file is being copied to the disk, this is immediately where the AI, in a matter of milliseconds, evaluate this and give a score if this looks malicious or not. Even if this is being bypassed, or maybe some stuff are not being copied to the disk, coming from a USB, coming from a lateral movement, then we have additional components that are running, of course, in parallel, which we call the behavioral AI, which is essentially looking on everything that is happening, understanding the deep relationship between all the activities, identifying if something malicious is running. When something malicious is running, quarantine and mitigate the entire execution, and then, of course, roll back and remediate if you select to do so.
Okay. Next question is, because with the rollback feature, you're using shadow copy, does SolarWinds EDR turn on shadow copy by default so that those shadow copies will be available if needed?
I believe that Microsoft does turn that by default, and if the setting is that to have shadow copy, we do one check because let me maybe give you a little bit of history on that. There used to be some versions of Windows when they did unbound limit on the shadow copy. So what they created is actually that you can blow up the hard disk with the shadow copy. So we do have additional check for that. So if somebody didn't set a boundary, we will set to 10% on the device just to make sure that we don't cause any issues. But we are not enabling the VSS if you selected it to be off. If you selected not to have VSS on one of your devices, you still get the entire set of functionalities besides the rollback. So you can select to do so. I've seen that also in the wild. We support that if you select to do so. Just to give another perspective to that, I mean, we're showing on the demo like something is running, encrypting all the files, and then you need to do a rollback. In a real life scenario, you should expect this is going to be prevented much sooner. If you notice during my demo, when the pop-up was showing, this is immediately the second that it would be quarantined and prevented. So in reality, you don't have many cases that you need to use the rollback. Just if something, maybe start encrypting maybe one or two files or maybe something little, and then you can do the rollback. But in the majority, if not all the cases, you'll see the prevention much sooner. So just to complete the answer, if you don't want to have shadow copies on your device, it means that you lose the functionality of the rollback of SolarWinds EDR. With that said, you'll be prevented before for malicious activity.
Okay. The next question, and we're almost running out of time, so I'll try and get through a couple of more of these quickly. You mentioned that AI uses multiple layers. Is one of those layers something similar to sandboxing? And if so, how does that affect the performance of the applications?
So we do not use sandboxing. All the logic resides on the agent itself. We are not sending nothing is going out of the device to a remote place to do sandboxing. We also don't do a sandboxing within the device. We're actually looking on things as they're happening. Because we have the capability of rolling back, this is okay. If something malicious is happening, then this is the exact second that we are taking over in real time and preventing that particular attack.
Okay, and then if the rollback feature relies on VSS, how does that work with OS 10 and Linux?
So the rollback functionality is a Windows only. With that said, like I never seen yet like any of our customers having any issues with ransomware on both like Linux and Mac OS. I know that sometimes you get a little bit of that, but again, the prevention would happen before. So consider the rollback as yet another layer of certainty that you can keep all your files being protected. The rollback functionality is supported on Windows devices only.
Okay, and probably our last question is, does SolarWinds EDR protect against non-ransomware threats like legacy AV would?
Of course, and I'm glad you mentioned this question. Our solution is not all about ransomware. Ransomware, as I mentioned in the beginning of our webinar, is eventually a malware that is utilizing encryption in order to get money. But the same activities can be from other type. To scrape password, this is something we do very good. So we see this is maybe the second common malware that trying to scrap password from your devices in order to use them and to get into your accounts. Of course, we protect from that. This is not a ransomware only solution. This is a solution that covers you from beginning to the end with all the things that can happen on your device. Ransomware is particularly interesting because of the rollback capability and because of the trend, but it's like one of many things that we see. We see lateral movement, we see injection to processors, we see financial attacks, we see people trying to scrap credentials, we see all of this, and SolarWinds EDR is perfectly capable of handling all of that.
Okay, well, thank you, Migo. We are out of time, and there are some questions I did not get to. I assume that these all will be forwarded on to the sales engineer group so that they can go through the questions that we have not gotten to and get you some answers to those. Migo, thank you again for joining me today. This was highly informational.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yes, thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. I know you guys are very, very busy. You have customers to take care of. Hopefully this was informative to you. In the last couple of seconds, you can go ahead and type trial if you'd like your account manager to reach out to you and talk to you some more about SolarWinds EDR. You can also take that link from the chat window and use that to sign up for a demo. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope you have a great week. See you on the next one.